Stop whining. It's already sold." Those were the words that changed everything. My son Mike stood in my kitchen like he owned the place, arms crossed, completely unbothered by the devastation he'd just delivered. "I needed that money for my trip to Italy." I stared at him, my hands still wet from washing dishes, Frank's coffee mug trembling in my grip. "You sold your father's watch." Without asking me. "Mom, seriously, get over it. It's just a watch. Just a watch." 7 months after burying my husband of 43 years, and my own son had stolen the only thing of Frank's I wore every day. Wound every morning like Frank taught me, feeling connected to him through that simple ritual. The thing about betrayal is that it has a taste. Bitter. Metallic like pennies on your tongue. Standing there in my Chicago kitchen, staring at my 42-year-old son who apparently thought grief had an expiration date, I tasted it fully for the first time. "Which pawn shop?" I asked quietly. Mike's wife, Ashley, looked up from her phone. "Oh, good. She's being reasonable now." Her voice dripped with that particular condescension she'd perfected over the years. "Honestly, Dorothy, clinging to material possessions isn't healthy. Frank wouldn't want you living in the past." Don't tell me what Frank would want, I thought, but bit my tongue. Ashley had been telling me what Frank would want since the funeral, usually whenever it involved me giving them something. "Golden State Pawn on Milwaukee Avenue," Mike said, checking his watch. An expensive Apple thing that probably cost more than Frank's timepiece was worth. They gave me $800. Not bad for something that old. $800. For a 1978 Submariner that Frank had saved 3 months of overtime to buy when Mike was born. The watch Frank wore every single day of our marriage. Except the day he died, when the hospital handed it to me in a plastic bag with his wedding ring. That watch was worth at least $3,000, I said. Ashley snorted. "In what universe? It wasn't even running properly because I was the one winding it, keeping it alive, keeping Frank alive in some small way." But they wouldn't understand that. Mike and Ashley lived in a world where everything had a price tag and nothing had a memory. "I'm going to get it back," I announced. "Good luck with that," Mike said, heading for the door. "We fly out tomorrow morning." Ashley's been planning this trip for months. Ashley followed him, pausing at the door with that fake, sympathetic expression she wore whenever she wanted to seem caring. "Dorothy, you really should consider therapy. This obsession with Frank's things isn't normal." The door slammed, leaving me alone with the bitter taste of betrayal and the silence that had become my constant companion since Frank died. But here's what Mike and Ashley didn't know about their pathetic old mother. I'd spent 40 years as a bank manager. I knew the difference between giving up and strategic planning, and I was done giving up. The pawn shop was exactly what I'd expected. Cramped, dusty, with the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everything look sickly. The man behind the counter had arms covered in tattoos and the weary expression of someone who'd seen every sob story in the book. "You hear about that watch?" he asked before I even opened my mouth. "How did you know? Your son warned me you might show up. Said you were having a hard time letting go." He shrugged apologetically. "Look, lady, I feel for you, but business is business. I paid fair market value, as if there was a standard price for 43 years of marriage. For the sound of Frank winding that watch every morning while his coffee brewed, for the weight of it in my hands when the hospital nurse placed it there alongside his wedding ring. I'll buy it back, whatever you need." The man, his name tag read Danny, looked uncomfortable. "It's already sold. Guy came in this morning, paid cash. No returns in this business." My heart sank. Some stranger was walking around Chicago wearing Frank's watch, and I'd never see it again, because my son needed spending money for his Italian vacation. "But here's the thing," Danny continued, lowering his voice. We found something weird when we were cleaning it up for sale. He disappeared into a back room and returned with a small manila envelope. There was a hidden compartment in the back. Real professional job. Had to have been done by a jeweler. Found this inside. Inside the envelope was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. In Frank's careful handwriting, Dorothy's birthday, July 15th, 1955. The day I knew I'd marry her. Below that, a series of numbers and letters that looked like some kind of code. SS4457, SHE8125, DS. I stared at the paper, my hands shaking. Frank had never mentioned any hidden compartment. In 43 years of marriage, he'd kept this secret, hidden in plain sight on his wrist. "You recognize those numbers?" Danny asked. I shook my head, but something about them nagged at me. They looked familiar, like a password or account number. Frank had been meticulous about record-keeping, always writing down important numbers in his careful handwriting. "The guy who bought the watch," I said suddenly. "What did he look like?" Danny's expression shifted, became more guarded. "Why?" "Because my husband hid this for a reason, and I think whoever bought that watch might be in for a surprise." "Ma'am, I really can't. Please." I leaned forward, letting Danny see the grief that was still raw after 7 months. "That watch is all I have left of him. I'm not asking you to break any laws. I just want to know if the buyer seemed to know about the compartment." Danny was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Finally, he sighed. He didn't say much, but when I mentioned we'd found something inside, he got real interested. Asked if we'd opened it. A chill ran down my spine. "Did he give you a name? Paid cash, no paperwork required for purchases." Danny paused, but he did ask specifically about watches that had come in recently. Said he collected vintage timepieces. Someone had been looking for Frank's watch specifically. But why? And how did they know about the hidden compartment? I thanked Danny and walked back to my car, the piece of paper burning in my purse like a secret I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. Frank had hidden this for 47 years. Hidden it from me. What else had my husband been hiding? That night, I sat at Frank's desk in my bedroom, surrounded by 43 years of financial records. Frank had kept everything. Bank statements, tax returns, investment account statements, all filed away in his precise, methodical manner. The code from the watch stared up at me from the piece of paper. SS4457. SHE8125. D's. I'd been through every account we owned, every investment, every safety deposit box. Nothing matched those numbers. Frank had been financially conservative. Savings account, checking account, a modest retirement fund. Nothing fancy, nothing hidden, or so I'd thought. My phone rang, interrupting my search. Mike's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, Ashley's upset. She says you made a scene at the pawn shop." I almost laughed. In what world was trying to recover my husband's stolen watch making a scene? "I went to buy back your father's watch. Unfortunately, someone else already purchased it. See? Problem solved. Time to move on." The casualness in his voice made my chest tighten with anger. This was Frank's son. The baby Frank had worked double shifts to provide for. The kid Frank taught to throw a baseball and change a tire. When had Mike become this cold? "Mike, there was something hidden inside the watch. Your father left me a message. Silence on the other end." "Then what kind of message?" "I'm not sure yet. But it looks like account numbers or a password." "Mom," Mike's voice changed, became more alert. "What exactly did the message say?" Something in his tone made me hesitate. This was the most interested Mike had sounded in anything related to his father since the funeral. "Just some numbers," I said vaguely. "Probably nothing important. Maybe I should come over, help you figure it out." Now I did laugh. bitter and sharp. Yesterday you told me to stop living in the past. Today you want to help sort through Frank's things. I'm just trying to be supportive. By stealing his watch? Mike sighed heavily. Fine, be stubborn. But don't come crying to me when you drive yourself crazy chasing ghosts. After he hung up, I stared at the phone. Mike's sudden interest was suspicious, but I couldn't figure out why. He'd made it clear he considered Frank's possessions worthless sentiment. Unless they weren't just sentiment. I returned to the desk, but this time I approached it differently. Instead of looking for accounts that matched the numbers, I started looking for patterns. Frank had been an accountant before his retirement. He thought in systems, in logical progressions. SS could be Social Security, but Frank's number started with 4527, not 4457. Where we'd lived our entire marriage. 0815 made me pause. August 15th, our wedding anniversary. DS was harder. Frank's initials were F's. Mine were D's. Dorothy Sullivan. My initials. The code included my initials. I pulled out my laptop and started searching. Swiss bank accounts used codes like this. So did offshore investment firms. 3 hours later, I found it. Secure Solutions Investment Management, based in the Cayman Islands. Their website was discreet, professional, catering to high-net-worth individuals seeking privacy and security. The account login page required a client number and password. With trembling fingers, I typed in SS44 through 57, CICHO 81 through 5, DS in the client number field. Valid account number appeared on the screen. Now I needed the password, something only I would know, something Frank knew I would figure out. I tried our wedding date. Our address, my birthday, nothing. Then I remembered the note. Dorothy's birthday, July 15th, 1955. The day I knew I'd marry her, not my actual birthday. July 15th was the day we met, at a summer dance in Millennium Park. Frank always said he knew that night he'd marry me someday. I typed in 071555 and held my breath. Access granted. The screen that loaded next made me gasp. Current account balance, $2,470,296.67. Frank had hidden nearly $2.5 million from me for our entire marriage. I stared at the screen until the numbers burned themselves into my retinas. $2.4 million in an account I'd never known existed. In a bank I'd never heard of. Hidden by a husband who'd spent 43 years convincing me we were living paycheck to paycheck. Every argument we'd had about money, every time I'd clipped coupons or bought generic groceries or patched Frank's work shirts instead of buying new ones. All of it while he had millions sitting in an offshore account. My first instinct was anger, pure white-hot rage at the deception. At the lies by omission. At 43 years of wondering if we'd have enough for retirement while Frank secretly stashed away a fortune. But then I clicked on the account history. The first deposit was made in 1982, 3 years after Mike was born. $5,000. The notation read, Initial Inheritance Investment, FS. Inheritance. Frank had never mentioned any inheritance. I scrolled through years of deposits, all relatively small. 500 here, 1,000 there. Regular contributions that explained why Frank had been so careful with our household budget. He hadn't been hiding money from our income. He'd been systematically building something separate. The deposits continued steadily until 2008, then jumped dramatically. Instead of hundreds of dollars, Frank had been depositing $10,000 and $20,000 at a time. The notation on those larger deposits made my blood run cold. Real estate liquidation, Chicago properties. Frank had been buying and selling real estate without my knowledge. Properties I'd never seen. Investments I'd never been consulted about. Business dealings that had apparently made him wealthy. How do you live with someone for 43 years and not know they're conducting secret business transactions? I clicked on the account messages and found a folder labeled, "For Dorothy, Emergency Access Only." Inside was a video file, uploaded just 3 months before Frank died. I hesitated before clicking play. Whatever Frank had to say about this secret fortune, I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. But I was alone in our bedroom at midnight. My son had stolen the only clue to this mystery, and I was apparently wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. Ready or not, I needed answers. Frank's face filled the screen, looking older and more tired than I remembered. He was sitting in his office at work, probably having recorded this during his lunch break. "Dorothy, if you're watching this, I'm gone. And something's gone wrong." His voice was steady, but his eyes looked sad. "I hoped you'd never need to access this account, that we'd grow old together, and I'd eventually tell you about it over dinner someday." He paused, rubbing his face with the same gesture he'd used whenever he was working through a difficult problem. "The money isn't mine, sweetheart. It was my father's, hidden away before he died in 1981. He made me promise to keep it secret, to protect it, to only use it if our family was ever in real danger." Frank's father had died when Mike was 2. I remembered Frank being devastated, remembered the modest inheritance that had paid off our mortgage. Apparently, there had been much more to it. My father saw what the Depression did to families, how quickly stability could disappear. He wanted to make sure his grandchildren would always be protected, no matter what happened. Frank looked directly into the camera, and I felt like he was sitting right next to me. "I've been investing the money carefully, conservatively. Every penny is documented. Every transaction is legal. It's grown because I've been reinvesting for 40 years. But the original amount was meant to be emergency money, insurance against catastrophe." The video continued with Frank explaining the account details, the investment strategy, the legal protections he'd put in place. But I was stuck on one phrase: "I hoped you'd never need to access this account." Frank had died of a heart attack at work. Sudden, unexpected, no warning signs. How could he have known I'd need this money? Unless the catastrophe he'd been protecting against wasn't random. Unless Frank had known something about our family that I was just beginning to understand. The next morning, I called in sick to my part-time job at the library. For the first time in 7 months, I had something more important to do than organizing returned books and shushing teenagers. I needed to understand what Frank had meant by real danger. The investment account had detailed records going back 40 years, but I started with the recent transactions. Frank's last deposit had been made just 2 weeks before he died. $25,000, with a notation, "Property sale, emergency liquidation, emergency liquidation." Frank had been converting assets to cash right before his death. I spent the morning researching every property transaction Frank had made. The man I'd been married to for 43 years had apparently been a secret real estate mogul, buying and selling properties all over Chicago with money I didn't know we had. But here's what made my blood run cold. Every property Frank had sold in the last year had been purchased by the same buyer, a company called Sullivan Investments, LLC. Sullivan was Mike's last name, too. I grabbed my phone and called my nephew Danny, who worked in real estate. If anyone would know about property transactions in Chicago, it would be Danny. "Aunt Dot, how are you holding up?" "I'm fine, honey. Listen, I need to ask you about something. Have you ever heard of a company called Sullivan Investments, LLC? Danny was quiet for a moment. "Actually, yeah. They've been pretty active lately, buying up properties in good neighborhoods. Cash deals, moving fast. Why?" "Do you know who owns the company? I can find out. Give me an hour." I spent that hour going through Frank's desk more carefully, looking for any documentation about his real estate dealings. Hidden in the back of his filing cabinet, behind 40 years of tax returns, I found a folder marked Insurance Policies. But instead of insurance documents, the folder contained contracts, property deeds, and correspondence related to Frank's investments. At the bottom of the pile was a letter that made my hands shake. It was from a private investigator, dated 6 months before Frank's death. Mr. Sullivan, per your request, I've completed the investigation into your son, Michael Sullivan's financial activities. My findings are concerning. Your son has accumulated approximately $180,000 in gambling debts to several offshore betting sites. He's also taken out multiple high-interest loans against his business, using fraudulent information about his income and assets. Of greater concern are the inquiries Mr. Sullivan has been making about your estate. He's contacted 3 different lawyers asking about inheritance law and the process for contesting wills. He's also made inquiries about power of attorney procedures and elder care facilities. I believe your son is planning to have you declared incompetent in order to gain control of your assets. The paperwork I've uncovered suggests he's been researching this option for several months. I recommend taking immediate steps to protect your assets and ensure your wife's financial security. Regards, Thomas Chen, private investigator. My phone rang. Danny, Aunt Dot, you're not going to believe this. Sullivan Investments LLC is owned by Mike Sullivan. You're Mike! I closed my eyes, the pieces finally falling into place. Frank hadn't been hiding money from me. He'd been hiding it from Mike. Every property sale, every cash deposit, every emergency liquidation. Frank had been systematically moving assets out of Mike's reach. Frank had known his own son was planning to rob us. But Frank had died before he could warn me, leaving only the hidden compartment in his watch as a clue to find the truth. My son hadn't stolen Frank's watch for vacation money. He'd stolen it because he was looking for exactly what I'd found: access to Frank's hidden fortune. And now that Mike knew I'd found something in the watch, he wouldn't stop until he figured out what it was. I was still sitting in Frank's chair, staring at the private investigator's report, when I heard Ashley's key in my front door. She'd had a spare key since the funeral, ostensibly to check on me when Mike was working. Now I understood she'd been checking on Frank's assets. "Dorothy, are you here?" Ashley's voice echoed through the house, artificially sweet. Mike and I stopped by before heading to the airport. I quickly shoved the investigator's report back into the folder and minimized the offshore account on my laptop screen. Whatever game Mike and Ashley were playing, I needed to understand the rules before I revealed my hand. "In the bedroom?" I called back. They appeared in the doorway moments later, Mike carrying a small suitcase, and Ashley wearing the kind of outfit that screamed expensive vacation. Her designer sunglasses probably cost more than most people's rent. "Just wanted to say goodbye," Mike said, but his eyes were scanning Frank's desk, taking inventory of the papers spread around me. "What are you working on?" "Sorting through your father's things," I said carefully. "There's so much I never knew about." Ashley stepped closer, her gaze focused on my laptop screen. "Find anything interesting?" The question sounded casual, but I caught the sharp attention in her voice. These weren't courtesy visits. They were reconnaissance missions. "Just old bank statements and tax records. Your father was very thorough with his paperwork." Mike relaxed slightly. "Yeah, Dad was obsessive about record keeping. Probably kept every receipt from the last 20 years. "Actually," I said, deciding to test their reaction, "I did find something odd. Your father had some kind of investment account I didn't know about. Nothing major, just a few thousand. The change in both their expressions was immediate and unmistakable." Mike stepped forward, trying to appear casual but failing completely. An investment account? What kind? I'm not sure yet. The paperwork is confusing. I might need to hire an accountant to help me figure it out. Ashley exchanged a quick glance with Mike. We could help you with that. Mike's good with financial documents. I bet he is, I thought, remembering the private investigator's report about Mike's gambling debts and fraudulent loan applications. That's very kind, but I already made an appointment with Frank's old accounting firm. They'll know how to handle his investments properly. Mike's jaw tightened. Mom, those guys charge $300 an hour. I can look at the paperwork for free. I can afford $300 an hour, Mike. The silence that followed was loaded with tension. Ashley's mask of concern was slipping, revealing the calculating woman underneath. Mike was practically vibrating with frustrated energy. We should probably get going, Ashley said finally. Don't want to miss our flight. But Mike didn't move. Mom, about the message you found in Dad's watch. Maybe I should take a look at those numbers before we leave. Just to make sure they're not something important. What numbers? Ashley asked sharply. Mike shot her a warning look. Mom found some kind of code in the watch. Probably nothing, but you never know. Now Ashley was fully alert, her vacation excitement replaced by laser focus. What kind of code? I stood up slowly, using my full height to look down at my daughter-in-law. The kind that's none of your business. Ashley's face flushed red. Excuse me? You heard me? My husband left me a private message. Private being the operative word. Mom, Mike stepped between us, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. We're family. There's no need for secrets. Secrets? I almost laughed at the irony. Like the secret gambling debts? Or the secret company you've been using to buy properties with money you don't have? The color drained from Mike's face. Ashley's mouth fell open. I don't know what you're talking about, Mike said, but his voice was shaky now. Sullivan Investments, LLC, ring a bell? I watched both their faces go pale. Your father knew, Mike. He knew everything. Ashley recovered first, her voice turning vicious. You crazy old woman. You don't know anything. I know your husband owes $180,000 to offshore gambling sites. I know he's been researching how to have me declared incompetent, and I know he's been planning this for months. Mike slumped against the doorframe like his strings had been cut. The fight went out of him completely. How? He whispered. Your father hired a private investigator. Every lie, every debt, every plan you made to steal from us. It's all documented. I walked to the desk and pulled out the investigator's report, watching Mike's face as he recognized the letterhead. Frank protected me from you, even after his death. That code you're so interested in, it's the key to more money than you've ever dreamed of, money that will never, ever belong to you. Ashley grabbed Mike's arm. We need to leave. Now. But Mike was staring at me with something that looked like respect for the first time in years. He really knew. He knew his son was planning to rob his own mother. What kind of man does that make you, Mike? For just a moment, Mike looked like the little boy I'd raised. Confused and ashamed. Then Ashley's grip on his arm tightened, and the moment passed. This isn't over, Ashley hissed as they headed for the door. Yes, it is, I called after them. It's been over since the day you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive. The front door slammed, leaving me alone with my husband's secrets and the knowledge that the real fight was just beginning. 2 days after Mike and Ashley's dramatic exit, my doorbell rang at 8 in the morning. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in an expensive suit holding a briefcase. Behind her stood a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a law school catalog. Mrs. Sullivan. I'm Catherine Wells from Wells Morrison and Associates. This is my colleague, David Kim. We represent your son Michael in some family legal matters. Family legal matters. That was one way to put it. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "What can I do for you?" Catherine smiled with the kind of practiced warmth that probably cost $300 an hour. "Mrs. Sullivan, your son is concerned about your well-being. He's asked us to discuss some options that might be beneficial for everyone involved." "Such as?" David stepped forward, pulling out a tablet. "We understand you may have discovered some financial accounts that your late husband kept private. While we're sure he had good intentions, managing complex investments can be overwhelming, especially during the grieving process." Overwhelming. As if I hadn't spent 40 years managing our household finances down to the penny while Frank secretly played real estate mogul. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." Catherine's smile never wavered. "Of course you are. But consider this. Your son could help shoulder that burden. We've drafted some documents that would give Michael power of attorney over your financial decisions. Just temporarily. Until you've had time to properly grieve." There it was. Exactly what Frank's private investigator had warned about. "Temporarily," I repeated, "and who determines when my grieving period is over?" David exchanged a glance with Catherine. "That would be at your discretion, naturally." Naturally. I stepped back toward my door. "Gentlemen, I think we're done here. Mrs. Sullivan," Catherine's voice sharpened slightly, "your son is prepared to file a petition with the court regarding your mental competency. He's concerned about some erratic financial decisions you've been making." "What erratic decisions?" "Accessing offshore accounts, conducting international financial transactions without professional guidance. To an outside observer, it might appear that you're not thinking clearly." The threat was crystal clear: sign over power of attorney voluntarily, or they'd have me declared incompetent by force. "You know what's interesting about threats?" I asked, leaning against my doorframe. "They only work if the person you're threatening doesn't have better lawyers than you do." Catherine's professional mask slipped slightly. "I beg your pardon," I said. "You can tell my son that his plan won't work. Frank left me more than just money. He left me protection." I closed the door in their faces and immediately called the number I'd found in Frank's hidden files. Thomas Chen, the private investigator, answered on the second ring. "Mr. Chen, this is Dorothy Sullivan, Frank Sullivan's widow. Mrs. Sullivan, I've been expecting your call." "You have. About 6 months ago, Frank asked me to prepare a comprehensive legal defense package in case anyone tried to challenge your competency or your right to his assets. Everything's ready to go. Frank had been 3 steps ahead, even in death. How ready? Mrs. Sullivan, by the time I'm done presenting evidence of your son's gambling debts, fraudulent loan, applications, and attempts to manipulate elderly family members, he'll be lucky if he doesn't face criminal charges." For the first time in months, I smiled genuinely. "Mr. Chen, I think it's time to make some phone calls." Thomas Chen's office was in a sleek downtown building that screamed expensive legal services. But as I sat across from him reviewing Frank's defense package, I realized my husband had been planning for this confrontation long before he died. "Your husband was thorough," Thomas said, spreading documents across his mahogany desk. Bank records showing Mike's gambling losses, audio recordings of him discussing plans to have you declared incompetent, even photographs of him meeting with estate planning lawyers. "Audio recordings?" Thomas nodded grimly. "Frank suspected Mike was planning something, so he had your house wired for sound last year. Completely legal since it was his own property." I thought about all the conversations Mike and Ashley had had in my kitchen over the past 7 months. Every dismissive comment about my mental state. Every calculation about Frank's assets. Every cruel joke about putting me in a nursing home. Frank had heard it all. There's more, Thomas continued. Frank also discovered that Ashley has been systematically isolating you from family and friends. She's been telling people you're becoming senile, that you need supervision. The pieces clicked into place. Why my sister-in-law had stopped calling. Why neighbors seemed awkward when they saw me. Why my book club friends had been treating me like I was fragile. Ashley had been conducting a whisper campaign, preparing the groundwork for Mike's legal challenge. How extensive is the evidence? Extensive enough to destroy any competency challenge, and probably land them both in jail for elder abuse and attempted fraud. Thomas pulled out a thick folder. But there's something else. Frank left specific instructions about what to do if you ever needed to access the offshore account. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Frank's careful handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 1 week before Frank's death. My dearest Dorothy, if you're reading this, then Mike has shown his true colors, and you've discovered the account I've been building for 40 years. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you about it while I was alive. But I needed to protect it from Mike until the time was right. The money isn't just an inheritance. It's justice. Every penny came from investments I made using information Mike thought he was hiding from us. When he started his real estate company, he would brag about his inside deals and guaranteed investments. What he didn't know was that I was listening and investing in the same opportunities with money he didn't know existed. Mike unknowingly funded his own downfall. Every property he flipped, I bought 3 more in the same area. Every stock tip he mentioned, I invested in with money from our original inheritance. The offshore account exists because I used Mike's own greed against him. Now it's your turn to use his greed against him. Thomas has instructions to make the account transfers immediately. By the time you read this letter, you'll have financial independence Mike can never touch. But more importantly, you'll have the power to choose how this ends. You can forgive him, take care of him, despite his betrayal, and hope he learns to be a better man. Or you can let him face the consequences of trying to steal from his own mother. The choice is yours, my love. It always has been. Forever yours, Frank. I set the letter down with shaking hands. Frank hadn't just protected me from Mike. He'd orchestrated Mike's downfall, using Mike's own schemes against him. Mrs. Sullivan, Thomas was watching me carefully. Are you ready to proceed? I thought about Mike as a little boy, excited about his first day of school. Then I thought about him standing in my kitchen 2 days ago, calling me a crazy old woman while his wife threatened me. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Mr. Chen, I want you to file every piece of evidence we have with the appropriate authorities. And I want you to do it today. The next morning brought chaos to my quiet Chicago neighborhood. I was sipping coffee and reading the newspaper when 3 black SUVs pulled up to Mike and Ashley's house across the street. Men in FBI windbreakers started carrying boxes out of their front door. My phone rang immediately. Mom! Mike's voice was panicked, desperate. What did you do? I protected myself, I said calmly, watching through my kitchen window as agents loaded computers and filing cabinets into their vehicles. What you should have done for your family instead of trying to rob them. You don't understand. This will destroy us. You destroyed yourselves. I just documented it. Ashley's voice came through the phone, shrill and angry. You vindictive old witch. We were trying to help you. By stealing my husband's watch? By planning to have me declared incompetent? By spreading lies about my mental health to isolate me from friends and family? The line went quiet, except for Ashley's ragged breathing. Frank knew everything, Mike. Every debt, every lie, every plan you made to rob us. He spent the last year of his life protecting me from his own son. Dad wouldn't. Your father hired a private investigator to document your gambling addiction and your plans to steal my inheritance. He had our house wired for sound so he could record every conversation you had about putting me in a nursing home. I heard Mike make a sound like a wounded animal. The FBI is seizing your business records because Frank's evidence shows you've been using fraudulent information to secure loans. The IRS is auditing you because you've been hiding income. And the state attorney's office is investigating you for elder abuse. Mom, please. Mike's voice broke. I never meant for it to go this far. When did it start, Mike? When did you decide your mother was worth more to you dead than alive? Long silence. When Mike spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. When I realized Dad had been hiding money from us. I saw some paperwork in his office last Christmas. References to accounts I'd never heard of. I thought if you both died, everything would come to me automatically. The honesty was brutal, but somehow cleaner than the months of lies and manipulation. You were wrong. Frank made sure everything would be protected from you. How much? Mike asked. How much did he hide? Enough to ensure I never have to depend on family who sees me as a burden. I hung up and watched through the window as FBI agents escorted Mike and Ashley to separate cars. Ashley was screaming at the agents, probably demanding lawyers and threatening lawsuits. Mike just looked broken. My phone rang again. This time it was my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. Dorothy, I just wanted to call and apologize. Ashley told me you were having memory problems, and I believed her. I should have talked to you directly. It's all right, Helen. Ashley can be very convincing. Is it true what they're saying? That Mike was planning to steal from you? I looked at Frank's picture on my mantel, remembering the man who'd protected me even after death. It's true, but it's over now. 3 weeks later, I sat in Thomas Chen's office reviewing the final legal documents. Mike and Ashley were facing federal fraud charges. Their business had been seized and their assets frozen pending investigation. But that morning had brought an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Sullivan. There's someone here to see you, Thomas's secretary announced. Says his name is Richard Torres, and he has something that belongs to you. The man who entered was in his 60s, well-dressed with the kind of careful demeanor that suggested law enforcement background. In his hands was a familiar blue velvet box. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm the one who bought your husband's watch from the pawn shop. I stared at him, confused. How did you know to find me? Richard smiled and set the box on Thomas's desk. Because Frank Sullivan hired me 20 years ago to protect this watch if anything ever happened to him. I don't understand. I'm a retired federal marshal, Mrs. Sullivan. Your husband contracted me to monitor certain situations. When the watch appeared at Golden State Pawn, I was notified immediately. Thomas was taking notes furiously. You were conducting surveillance on Mike Sullivan? Among other things, Frank was thorough in his preparations. Richard opened the velvet box, revealing Frank's watch. But there's something else you need to know about this timepiece. He turned it over and pressed something on the back. A second hidden compartment opened, smaller than the first. Inside was a micro SD card. Frank recorded everything, Mrs. Sullivan. Every conversation Mike had about manipulating you. Every meeting with lawyers about declaring you incompetent. Every discussion about what to do with your assets after you were gone. The room spun slightly. Frank was recording Mike for 18 months, Richard continued. Audio, video, financial records. Everything needed to ensure Mike could never successfully challenge your mental competency or your right to Frank's inheritance. Richard inserted the SD card into Thomas's computer. The screen filled with folder after folder of evidence. Audio recordings, video files, financial documents. Even photographs of Mike meeting with lawyers and gamblers. Your husband loved you enough to spend the last 2 years of his life building an unbreakable legal defense against his own son. I thought about Frank's final months. How stressed he'd seemed. How many late work meetings he'd had. How distracted he'd been at dinner. He hadn't been hiding from me. He'd been protecting me. "There's one more thing," Richard said quietly. "Frank left specific instructions about what to do if Mike ever tried to have you declared incompetent." He pulled out a sealed envelope marked "Final Instructions." Dorothy's protection plan. Inside was a document that made my breath catch. In the event that Michael Sullivan attempts legal action against Dorothy Sullivan's mental competency, the following assets will be transferred immediately to Chicago Children's Hospital in Michael Sullivan's name. All property owned by Sullivan Investments, LLC. All gambling debts and outstanding loans, all legal fees and court costs associated with elder abuse charges. Michael Sullivan will be personally responsible for all debts and legal consequences while receiving no benefit from any inheritance or asset transfer. Frank had arranged for Mike to inherit his own destruction. "Your husband was a brilliant man," Thomas said admiringly. He turned Mike's greed into a legal trap. "Frank knew Mike would never stop trying to get the money," Richard explained. "So he made sure that any attempt to steal from you would result in Mike losing everything he already had." I picked up Frank's watch, feeling its familiar weight in my hands. For 43 years, I'd thought I was married to a simple accountant who worried about money and saved every penny. Instead, I'd been married to a master strategist who'd spent 2 years orchestrating the most elaborate protection plan in legal history. "Mrs. Sullivan," Richard said gently, "your husband asked me to give you a final message if this day ever came." He handed me one last envelope, this one unsealed. Inside, in Frank's handwriting, "Dorothy, you were always stronger than you knew. I just made sure you'd have the tools to prove it. Love always. Frank." I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my purse alongside the code from the first hidden compartment. 2 secrets, 2 layers of protection, all designed to keep me safe from the son we'd raised together. "Mrs. Sullivan," Thomas said, pulling out another folder. "There's one more matter we need to discuss. Frank's will. I thought the will had been settled months ago. The basic estate, yes. But Frank had a separate trust that was only to be activated if certain conditions were met. Those conditions have now been met." "What conditions?" "If Mike attempted to gain control of your assets through legal means, or if he tried to have you declared incompetent, or if he engaged in elder abuse, any of those triggers would activate the secondary trust." Thomas opened the folder, revealing documents I'd never seen before. "Frank established a charitable remainder trust 5 years ago. It's been growing quietly ever since. The trust is currently valued at approximately $800,000. My hands trembled. Frank had hidden even more money. The trust was designed with very specific instructions. If Mike ever betrayed you, the money would go to Chicago Children's Hospital. But it would be donated in Mike's name. I stared at Thomas. Why in Mike's name? Frank wanted Mike to see what he'd lost. Every time Mike drives past that hospital, every time he sees a news article about charitable donations, he'll know that his greed directly funded the one thing Frank cared about most outside of family. It was brilliant and cruel in equal measure. Frank had ensured that Mike's betrayal would create a permanent public monument to his failure as a son. "There's more," Thomas continued. "The hospital has agreed to name their new pediatric wing after Frank. But the dedication plaque will read, 'The Frank Sullivan Memorial Wing, funded through the generous contribution of Michael Sullivan.'" Frank had given Mike exactly what he'd always wanted, his name on something important. But instead of wealth and status, Mike's name would forever be associated with the money he'd tried to steal from his own mother. "When does this happen?" I asked. "The paperwork is ready. We just need your signature to activate the trust transfer." I thought about Mike sitting in a holding cell, facing federal charges. I thought about Ashley's designer sunglasses and expensive vacation plans. I thought about the private investigator's report, and Frank's video message, and the watch that had started this whole nightmare. Then I thought about Frank, working double shifts to support his family, teaching Mike to throw a baseball, dying alone at his desk with a heart attack, while his son plotted to rob his widow. Where do I sign? 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of Chicago Children's Hospital, watching workers install a brass plaque that read, "The Frank Sullivan Memorial Wing," generously funded by Michael Sullivan in honor of his father's legacy. Frank's offshore account had been more than enough to secure my future and fund the hospital expansion he'd always dreamed about. The final irony was that Mike's attempt to steal from me had directly resulted in the largest charitable donation in the hospital's history. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Chen. "Mike's sentencing hearing is next week. They're recommending 3 years federal prison plus full restitution. Ashley took a plea deal for 2 years. Still want to attend?" I typed back, "No, I have better things to do." And I did. At 73, I was finally living the life Frank had protected for me. I'd bought a small house near the lake, joined 3 book clubs, and started volunteering at the hospital twice a week. For the first time in decades, I was making decisions based on what I wanted, not what my family expected. My doorbell rang as I was preparing dinner. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman with Mike's eyes and nervous smile. "Grandma Dorothy?" "It's Melissa, Mike's daughter." I hadn't seen her since Frank's funeral, when she was finishing college and starting her first job. Ashley had made sure to cut me off from the grandchildren along with everyone else. I opened the door. "Melissa, what a surprise. I know I should have called first." She was twisting her hands nervously. "I heard about Dad and Ashley, about what they did to you. I wanted to apologize. You have nothing to apologize for." "I do, though. I knew something was wrong. Dad kept asking weird questions about Grandpa Frank's finances, and Ashley was always making comments about your memory. I should have said something." I studied my granddaughter's face, seeing Frank's honesty there along with Mike's features. "Come in, sweetheart. Let's talk." Over dinner, Melissa told me about her new job teaching elementary school, her engagement to a young doctor, and her guilt about her father's crimes. "I keep thinking I should visit him in prison," she said, "but I'm so angry about what he did to you. Anger is normal, but Mike is still your father. How can you not hate him?" I thought about Frank's letter, about the choice he'd given me between forgiveness and justice. Because hate would mean he still had power over me. I choose peace instead. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "I missed you so much. Ashley told everyone you were getting confused, that you didn't want to see us anymore. I never stopped wanting to see you. And I never will." As Melissa helped me clear the dishes, she paused at Frank's photo on the mantel. I always wondered why Grandpa Frank wore that watch every single day. He must have really loved it. I smiled, thinking about the 2 hidden compartments, the offshore account, the elaborate protection plan that had saved my life. He loved what it protected. "Can I ask you something?" Melissa said quietly. "The hospital wing, the one with Dad's name on it, are you trying to punish him?" I considered the question carefully. "No, I think Frank was trying to teach him. Your father spent years chasing money, thinking it would make him happy. Frank wanted him to see what money can actually do when it's used for something bigger than greed." Melissa nodded slowly. "Dad never understood that, did he? That Grandpa Frank wasn't hiding money because he was selfish. He was protecting it because he knew Dad couldn't handle it responsibly. Frank knew his son better than Mike knew himself." After Melissa left with promises to visit every week, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset over Lake Michigan. Frank's watch was on my wrist, keeping perfect time. He'd been gone 15 months, but somehow he was still taking care of me. My phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Sullivan? This is Christine Park from the Chicago Tribune. I'm writing a feature about the Sullivan Memorial Wing at Children's Hospital. I was hoping I could interview you about your husband's legacy. I hesitated. Frank had spent his entire life avoiding attention, working quietly behind the scenes, protecting his family without fanfare. But maybe it was time people knew the truth about the kind of man he'd been. I'd be happy to talk, I said, but I want to tell you the whole story, not just the charitable donation. The whole story, about a man who spent 43 years building something beautiful in secret, about a father who loved his son enough to save him from his own worst impulses, about a husband who protected his wife even after death. Christine was quiet for a moment. That sounds like quite a story. It is, and it started with a watch. The article ran 2 weeks later on the front page of the Sunday edition. The headline read, "The Watch That Changed Everything." How one man's secret protected his family for 43 years. Christine had done her research. She'd interviewed Thomas Chen about the legal protections Frank had put in place. She'd talked to Richard Torres about the surveillance operation. She'd even gotten a statement from Danny at the pawn shop about finding the hidden compartment. But the heart of the story was about love. The kind of love that plans for disasters that might never come. The kind of love that protects without seeking credit. The kind of love that saves someone even when they don't know they need saving. The article included a photograph of Frank's watch, both hidden compartments open. Symbols of the secrets he'd carried for decades. Within days, I started receiving letters. Dozens, then hundreds, from people all over the country who'd read the story and wanted to share their own experiences. A woman in Boston wrote about discovering her late husband had been secretly paying her mother's medical bills for years. A man in Seattle found out his father had been anonymously funding scholarships for underprivileged students. A daughter in Miami learned her mother had been protecting her from an abusive ex-husband without ever mentioning it. Frank's story had touched something universal. The recognition that love isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's quiet, methodical, hidden in the mechanics of a watch that keeps perfect time. One letter in particular caught my attention. It was from a lawyer in New York. "Dear Mrs. Sullivan, I represent several clients who, like your husband, are concerned about protecting their assets from family members who might not use them responsibly. Would you be willing to consult with us about the strategies your husband employed? Many of our clients struggle with the same dilemma: how to provide for loved ones without enabling destructive behavior. Your husband's approach was both legally sound and emotionally intelligent. We would compensate you for your time and expertise." I showed the letter to Thomas Chen the next time we met for lunch. "You know what this means," he said, studying the letterwork. "You could turn Frank's protection plan into a template. Help other people in similar situations." "Is that even legal?" "Absolutely. Estate planning consultants do it all the time, and you have something most consultants don't: a real story that demonstrates why these protections matter." I thought about it for a week. Finally, I called the New York lawyer back. "I'll do it, but on one condition. Any fees I receive go directly to the Frank Sullivan Memorial Fund at Children's Hospital. I don't want to profit from my husband's death, but I want his strategies to help other families avoid what we went through." Over the next year, I consulted with lawyers and estate planners across the country. I helped families set up protected trusts, advised elderly clients on how to recognize financial abuse, and shared Frank's story with anyone who needed to hear it. The work gave me purpose beyond grief. Every family I helped felt like I was honoring Frank's memory, continuing the protection he'd started, but the most meaningful conversation came from an unexpected source. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Mike. He'd lost weight. His expensive clothes had been replaced with cheap khakis and a wrinkled shirt. He looked older, worn down by 18 months in federal prison. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Mom," he said quietly, "I know I have no right to be here." "You're right. You don't." Mike nodded, accepting the rebuke. "I've been out for 2 weeks, probation for the next 5 years. Lost everything. The business, the house. Ashley filed for divorce while I was inside." I didn't feel satisfaction at his misery, just a deep, tired sadness for the man my son had become. "I drove past the hospital yesterday," Mike continued. "Saw Dad's name on the building, and mine underneath it. Did you go inside?" Mike shook his head. "Couldn't make myself do it, but I sat in the parking lot for an hour. Watching families come and go, parents carrying sick kids, doctors rushing between buildings, all of it funded by money I tried to steal." His voice broke on the last word. "Why are you here, Mike? To say I'm sorry, and to tell you you were right about everything." Mike looked at me directly for the first time. "Dad wasn't hiding money because he didn't trust you. He was hiding it because he didn't trust me. And he was right not to. It took you 18 months in prison to figure that out. It took me losing everything to understand what I had." Mike's eyes were red. "I had a father who loved me enough to protect Mom from his own son. I had a mother who never gave up on me even when I didn't deserve it. And I threw it all away because I couldn't see past my own greed. I watched my son struggle with emotions he'd suppressed for years. This was the most honest I'd seen him since he was a child." "I don't expect you to forgive me," Mike said. "I just wanted you to know I finally understand what Dad was trying to teach me." "What's that?" "That some things are more important than money. Like family, like integrity, like being the kind of man your son can be proud of." Mike's voice was barely a whisper. "I failed at all of it." "Yes, you did." Mike flinched at the bluntness, but didn't argue. "But you're still here," I continued, "still breathing, still capable of being better than you were. Mom, your father spent 2 years building protections against you. But you know what he told me in that video message? He hoped it would never be necessary. He hoped you'd change before it was too late." Mike's face crumpled. "I didn't change. I got worse. Then maybe now is when you start." We stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, Mike nodded. "I got a job. Construction work. It's hard, and the pay is terrible, but it's honest. That's a start. And I've been going to Gamblers Anonymous. 3 meetings a week. Got a sponsor and everything." "That's good, Mike. Mike hesitated. "I also started volunteering at the hospital, in Dad's wing. I can't work directly with patients because of my record, but I help with maintenance, fixing things, keeping the building running." I stared at my son, surprised. "Why?" "Because every day I work there, I remember what I almost destroyed. I see kids fighting for their lives while I was fighting over money that wasn't even mine." Mike met my eyes. "It keeps me honest." For the first time since he'd appeared at my door, I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. "Your father would be proud of that," I said quietly. Mike's eyes filled with tears. "You think so?" "Frank always believed people could change. That's why he gave me a choice about what to do with the evidence. He could have had you arrested while he was still alive. But he left it up to me, because he hoped you'd prove him wrong about needing the protections. I didn't prove him wrong. I proved him right. Not yet you haven't." "Mike, Frank's protections were about the future, not just the past. He wanted to make sure that even if you made mistakes, even if you failed, I would still be okay." "Well, I am okay. Now the question is, are you going to be?" Mike wiped his eyes roughly. "I'm trying, Mom. Every day I'm trying. Then keep trying. And maybe someday we can figure out what our relationship looks like now. It won't ever be what it was. No, I agreed, it won't. But maybe it can be something real, built on honesty instead of expectations. Mike nodded slowly. I'd like that. As he turned to leave, I called after him. Mike? He looked back. Your daughter visits me every week. She's getting married next spring. Mike's face showed surprise and pain. Melissa's engaged? She wanted you to know. She's struggling with whether to invite you to the wedding. Tell her... Mike's voice was thick. Tell her I understand if she doesn't. But I'd be honored to be there if she wants me. Tell her yourself. She deserves to hear it from you. After Mike left, I sat in Frank's chair and picked up his watch. The weight of it was familiar now, comforting. Both hidden compartments were empty, their secrets revealed, their purpose fulfilled. But the watch itself kept ticking. Steady, reliable, marking time in a world that had changed completely since Frank first strapped it to his wrist. That night, I wrote a letter to Frank. I knew he'd never read it, but somehow it felt important to say the words anyway. Dear Frank, Mike came by today. For the first time in 2 years, I saw glimpses of the boy we raised. The one who got lost somewhere along the way. I don't know if he'll ever fully become the man you hoped he'd be, but he's trying, and maybe that's enough for now. You were right about everything. The protections you built saved my life, gave me freedom I never knew I needed, and taught our son a lesson he couldn't have learned any other way. But here's what you didn't know, my love. You didn't just protect me from Mike, you protected Mike from himself. By making it impossible for him to steal from us, you saved him from becoming someone even worse than he already was. Your protections were an act of love for both of us. I miss you every day. I miss the sound of you winding this watch in the morning. I miss your careful handwriting on important documents. I miss the way you thought 3 steps ahead of everyone else. But I'm not afraid anymore. You made sure of that. The watch keeps perfect time, just like you promised it would. All my love, Dorothy. The wedding took place on a perfect spring morning in Millennium Park, the same place where Frank and I had met 57 years earlier. Melissa had chosen the location deliberately, a way of honoring the love story that had started everything. I sat in the front row, Frank's watch on my wrist, watching my granddaughter marry the young doctor, who looked at her like Frank used to look at me. In the third row, I could see Mike, thin and uncomfortable in a borrowed suit, crying quietly as his daughter walked down the aisle. Melissa had invited him. Not to walk her down the aisle, that honor went to her uncle Danny, but to attend as a guest, to witness her happiness, to be part of the family again, even if his role had changed forever. After the ceremony, Mike approached me hesitantly. "She's beautiful," he said, watching Melissa laugh with her new husband. "Just like you were at your wedding." "You weren't even born at my wedding." Mike smiled faintly. "Dad showed me pictures, told me stories about the day he knew he'd marry you." "At a dance?" I said. "Right over there." I pointed to the pavilion where a band was setting up for the reception. "Frank asked me to dance, and I knew." "Knew what? That he was someone special. Someone who saw the world differently than everyone else." Mike was quiet for a moment. I never really understood Dad when he was alive. I thought he was just ordinary. A guy who went to work and came home and watched baseball on weekends. "He was extraordinary," I said firmly, "in all the ways that mattered. I know that now." Mike's voice was soft. "I spent 18 months in prison reading those articles about him. The Tribune story. The legal journals analyzing his protection strategies. Even a book someone wrote about estate planning using Dad as a case study. There's a book called The Watchmaker's Will, about how Dad built protections like a watchmaker builds a timepiece. Precise, methodical, beautiful in its complexity. I made a mental note to find that book. The point is, Mike continued, Dad was brilliant, and I was too stupid and greedy to see it. You weren't stupid, Mike, you were lost. Same thing. No, I corrected. Stupid is permanent. Lost just means you haven't found your way yet. Melissa appeared beside us, radiant in her wedding dress. Grandma, can I steal you for a dance? Of course, sweetheart. As we walked toward the dance floor, Melissa whispered, Thank you for convincing me to invite Dad. I know it was hard for you. It was the right thing to do. Your grandfather would have wanted it. I think Grandpa Frank would be proud of you. Melissa glanced back at Mike, who was standing alone on the edge of the celebration. You gave Dad what he needed. Consequences and a second chance. That's what real love looks like. Your grandfather taught me that. The reception lasted into the evening. I danced with Danny, and with Melissa's new husband, and even with Mike. One awkward, silent dance where neither of us knew quite what to say. But as the sun set over Lake Michigan, casting golden light across the pavilion, I felt Frank's presence as clearly as if he were standing beside me. He'd brought me to this place 57 years ago. He'd protected me for 43 years of marriage, and he was still protecting me now, through the watch on my wrist, through the money that secured my future, through the lessons he'd taught our family about love and consequences. Later that night, alone in my small house by the lake, I opened the velvet box that held Frank's watch. Both hidden compartments were empty now, but I pressed the mechanism anyway, feeling the delicate spring release. Frank had spent years building these protections, planning for disasters, preparing for betrayals, ensuring my safety even after his death. But sitting there in the quiet darkness, I realized something profound. The greatest protection Frank had given me wasn't the money or the evidence or the legal strategies. It was the knowledge that I was worth protecting, that my life had value, that I deserved to be safe and secure and loved, even when the people closest to me forgot it. For 43 years, I'd thought I was just Frank's wife, the woman who clipped coupons and packed lunches and kept the house running while he worked. But Frank had seen something different. He'd seen a woman who deserved financial independence, who deserved truth, who deserved the power to make her own choices about forgiveness and justice. He'd given me all of that, wrapped in the mechanics of a watch that never stopped ticking. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. Thank you for today, Grandma. Grandpa Frank would have loved seeing us all together again. I typed back. He was there, sweetheart. I felt him, and I had, in the weight of the watch on my wrist, in the spring sunshine, in the second chance Mike was struggling to deserve, in the love that filled Millennium Park as 3 generations of our family celebrated life going on. Over the next few months, my consulting work expanded. I traveled to cities across the country, speaking at conferences about elder financial abuse and protection strategies. Frank's story had become a cautionary tale, a template, a roadmap for other families navigating the complicated intersection of love and money. But the most satisfying work happened quietly. In lawyers' offices and living rooms where elderly clients learned they could protect themselves without sacrificing family relationships. Where adult children realized their parents' caution wasn't about distrust. It was about wisdom. One afternoon, I received a package from Mike. Inside was a handmade wooden box, beautifully crafted with delicate inlay work. A note read, "I've been taking woodworking classes. Made this for Dad's watch. Thought you might like it." The box was perfect, lined with velvet, with compartments for the watch and the papers from both hidden sections. Mike had carved Frank's initials on the lid, F's, in a script that matched Frank's own handwriting. I called him immediately. "Mike, this is beautiful." "You like it?" He sounded nervous, like a child seeking approval. "It's perfect. Where did you learn to do this? Classes at the community center. Turns out I'm pretty good with my hands when I'm not gambling away everything I own." There was no bitterness in his voice. Just simple honesty. "Your father would be proud." "I've been making boxes for other people too," Mike continued, "selling them online. It's not much money, but it's honest work. And it helps with the restitution payments." Frank had required Mike to pay back every penny he'd stolen from the accounts Mike had fraudulently obtained. It would take years, maybe decades, but Mike was trying. "How's the hospital work?" I asked. "Good. They promoted me to maintenance supervisor last month. Still can't believe they trust me with responsibility after everything." "People can change, Mike, if they work at it. That's what Dad used to say, isn't it? That people could always be better than they were. Always?" After we hung up, I placed Frank's watch in the box Mike had made. The watch that had started everything. The watch that had ended everything. The watch that had saved my life and changed my son's life and taught our family what love actually meant when tested. 2 years after Frank's death, I stood in Thomas Chen's office one final time. "All the legal matters are resolved," Thomas said, closing the last folder. "Mike's restitution payments are on schedule. The hospital trust is fully funded. Your personal accounts are secure." Frank's protections worked exactly as he intended. I nodded, feeling the weight of finality. "There's one more thing," Thomas said. He pulled out a final envelope. "Different from all the others. This arrived at my office yesterday. It's been in a secure facility for the past 2 years, set to be delivered on the 2nd anniversary of Frank's death." "From Frank?" Thomas nodded. "He gave instructions that you were only to receive this once everything else was resolved. Once you'd made your choices about Mike. Once you'd found your own path forward. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper in Frank's handwriting. My dearest Dorothy, if you're reading this, then 2 years have passed. You've discovered my secrets. You've faced Mike's betrayal. You've made impossible choices about our family's future. I hope I gave you the tools you needed, the money for security, the evidence for protection, the strategies for justice. But more than that, I hope I gave you freedom. For 43 years, you were my wife, my partner, my love. You were so many things to so many people. Mother, daughter, friend, colleague. But in all that time, I'm not sure you ever had the chance to discover who Dorothy Sullivan was when no one needed anything from her. So this is my final gift, my final protection, my final act of love. The offshore account has one more surprise. Check the auxiliary holdings folder. I love you. I've always loved you. I will always love you. Now go live the life you deserve. Forever yours, Frank. Thomas was already pulling up the account on his computer. The auxiliary holdings folder contained a single investment, a trust fund set up in my name alone. Current value, Thomas said quietly, $200,000. With instructions that it can only be used for personal enrichment, travel, education, hobbies, whatever brings you joy. Frank had hidden one last secret. Money that wasn't for emergencies or legal battles or family drama. Money that was simply for me, to become whoever I wanted to be. I stared at the screen, tears streaming down my face. For 43 years, I'd been Frank's wife. For 2 years, I'd been Frank's widow. But now, finally, I could be Dorothy, just Dorothy, with the freedom to discover what that meant. That summer, I traveled to Italy, the trip I'd planned before Mike stole the watch. But this time, I went alone. Not because I had no one to travel with. Melissa had offered to join me, and so had several friends from my book clubs. But I needed to prove something to myself, that I could navigate foreign cities, make my own decisions, have adventures without anyone's permission or approval. In Rome, I stood in front of the Trevi fountain and threw a coin over my shoulder. making a wish not for love or wealth or family reconciliation, but for continued courage. The courage to keep becoming whoever I was meant to be. In Florence, I took an art class and discovered I had a talent for watercolors I'd never known existed. In Venice, I rode in a gondola at sunset and thought about Frank, not with grief, but with gratitude. Gratitude for his protection, for his love, for setting me free even as he held me close. When I returned home 3 weeks later, I felt different, lighter. More myself than I'd been in decades. The house by the lake was waiting. The hospital volunteering was waiting. The consulting work was waiting. Melissa and her new husband were waiting with news that I'd be a great-grandmother by Christmas. And on my dresser, in the beautiful wooden box Mike had made, Frank's watch kept perfect time. I picked it up one evening, feeling its familiar weight. On impulse, I decided to wear it. Not every day like Frank had, not as a memorial or a reminder of grief, but as a celebration of survival, of transformation, of love that protects without suffocating, of secrets that save rather than destroy. The watch ticked steadily on my wrist, keeping time in a life I was finally living fully. And somewhere, somehow, I knew Frank was smiling. The greatest love stories aren't about passion or romance. They're about protection, about someone loving you enough to fight battles you don't even know you're facing, about being set free by the very protections that keep you safe. Frank had spent 2 years preparing for a war I never saw coming, ensuring that his death wouldn't leave me defenseless against our son's greed. But more than that, he'd spent 43 years building something beautiful, a marriage, a family, a legacy of love that transcended money and watches in hidden compartments. Some people spend their whole lives looking for that kind of love. I was lucky enough to wear it on my wrist for 43 years and carry it in my heart forever. As I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun set over Lake Michigan, I realized Frank's final lesson. The watch had never been about time. It had been about timing. Knowing when to protect, when to reveal, when to hold on, when to let go, and now, finally, it was time for me to truly live. The watch ticked on. The sun set. The water sparkled, and Dorothy Sullivan, 74 years old, free, secure, and loved beyond measure, smiled at the life still waiting to be lived.